My mentor, Richard Russell, God rest his soul, said, if you make 7% a year, you are a rock star. This is a guy that was an analyst in Dow theory, the Dow theory letters, for 50, 60 years. And he says, you make 7% a year, you are a rock star. Well, you know, gold is appreciated by 9.1% per year for the last century, for the last 25 years. And yet no one notices it because it's the tortoise, not the hare. And you take Bitcoin out of the equation, which started from zero. It's outperformed every asset class, period, that you can think of. Every one, bonds, stocks, you name it, handsomely, without the counterparty risk, without the default risk, and all of the stuff associated with the U.S. government. So
today, we're fortunate to be joined again by Andy Schectman, CEO of Miles Franklin. Andy, welcome to Ron's Basement.
Great to be in the basement, brother. I was telling you that growing up in Minnesota, all the fun things we did as kids and high school and with that girlfriend, and we always seemed to be down in the basement. And you know, they don't have basements here in Florida any longer. I don't get to hang out in the basement, so it's always a treat to come back and hang with you. So thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, well, hey, I'm 54 years old, and I'm hanging out in the basement with a giant stuffed bear. So
well, hey, you know, that's all good. That's all good. You know, it's just brings me back to my childhood is all, and we all got to grow up sometime, I guess.
That's right. That's right. So it's been a few months since we talked. I think last time we talked, the price of gold was probably around $2,100. Silver was maybe $23. What's changed in the last 3 months, Andy? Are we has the world become a nicer, more friendly place, or is it still an environment where silver and gold could act as a safe harbor for those of us who decide to protect ourselves with it?
Well, you know, since we last talked, we had our brain dead Treasury Secretary in Brazil, and that, you know, for people keeping track, that's the B in BRICS, who said, you know, it's not enough. And in Brazil, she said this, right? Not enough to sanction the Russian $380 billion in Forex reserves. And I think they vote on this tomorrow. But we need to confiscate those Russian Forex reserves. And, you know, just here last week, she gave an interview from the too stupid to be stupid continuation category of, you know, she gave an interview with CNBC where she said, if China aids Russia in any capacity to their war machine, their war machine, that we would sanction their companies, their banks, and Beijing themselves. So, you know, Ron, it's okay for us to give $200 billion to the Ukraine with no congressional oversight overall at all. But if China wants to aid their ally in the BRICS group in any capacity that is remotely deemed a contribution to their war effort, well, we will sanction everyone from the government down to all the companies and the banks. So, excuse me, frog in my throat. It is this sanctioning and this hypocritical sanctioning at that, where it's okay for us to do it, but no one else, that is putting a floor under the price of gold. I believe as these countries are shedding treasuries and accumulating gold, which has no counterparty risk, and it has no sanction risk, and no confiscation risk, and no default risk. I think that is what's happening. A transition slowly from treasuries to gold is what's doing it.
Yeah, like a double standard. It seems like we have with a lot of the world, and it feels like a lot of the world is kind of calling monkey on that, saying, "Well, you know what? We're not going to play this game any longer." How important or how big of a factor would you say geopolitical uncertainty, war, is in terms of supporting the price of precious metals? I guess we could even look back throughout, like, not all of history, but let's say over the last 1,000 years. You know, I get this notion, and I've heard it said that it's one of the primary factors that when countries don't get along, they typically don't want to hold each other's paper money or IOUs. What they really want are things like silver and gold. Do you think that's what's playing into this movement that we've seen with central banks around the world acquiring?
Yeah, 100%. But it's one thing to be, you know, it's one thing to be one country versus another with their local currencies. It's another thing when it is the world reserve currency, and a world reserve currency that is broke and accumulating $1 trillion in debt every 90 to 100 days. It took 200 years to do it the first time. It is one thing for a country like ours, where every single country on the planet has had to stockpile dollars in order to buy oil for the last 50 years. And it's another thing altogether when that country, which is supposed to be neutral as the issuer of the reserve currency, can go around making sanctions saying we can do this, but you can't. And if we don't align ideologically, we won't just sanction you the way we did Iran, but we are actually going to confiscate your assets and give them to your foe who you're fighting a war against. And I say this all the time, the way the world looks at us, right? You know, and our media does such a crap job, Ron, of telling the world what's happening, telling the U.S. what's happening. They don't get it. They don't get the way that people look at us. And look at Iraq as an example, right? We invaded them 20 years ago. We destroyed their country looking for weapons of mass destruction, but we're sorry. We didn't find any. Sorry. But here we are 20 years later. We're still occupying their country. Can you imagine if we were invaded and 20 years later, there's still a military force here? And they came under the guise of one thing and well, it wasn't there, but they never left. And we're still sanctioning 14 of their banks for having the audacity to trade with Iranian banks to buy liquid natural gas to cool their homes in the middle of a hot summer. 14 of their banks are being sanctioned, and they made $95 billion in oil revenue last year in 23. The Iraqis did, but they're not allowed to control that, at least not yet. I think there's rumbling, or they may have just reached a deal. But the point is, they asked for $1 billion late in the year last year, and we said it's not a good time. So what have they done? Well, they've made trading in dollars illegal. If you own a business, you will go to jail if you trade in dollars, and your business will be taken by the state. They have formally applied to the BRICS. They are in the process of kicking Western coalition forces out of the country. And now for the past 6 months since January, there are no dollar bills in the whole country. They have been taken out of all the banks. And when you look at the way that the world views us as hypocritical, we can come in, we can destroy your country, we can topple your regime, we can sanction your banks 20 years after we came in under one pretense that was false. And we can still control your money, your oil revenue, your natural resources. I mean, they look at us as ridiculously, silly, just like us telling China, you do this, we're going to sanction you and Beijing and the banks and yet we just voted to give another $60 billion to the Ukraine, $200 billion, yet $5 billion to build a border wall just because Trump had his name attached to it. Well, that's insane. We can't do that. And look at what's happened. 12 million people have entered this country illegally. So when you have the Congressional Budget Office, which is the last nonpartisan group in Washington, say that in less than 7 years, by 2031, 100% of all tax revenues will just go to pay the interest on the debt and mandatory entitlement spending. Think of it this way, Ron. How does our country remain the powerhouse militarily and financially when, military spending is discretional? We'll have to borrow everything to fund our military and to fund all of these other things that we're doing, borrowing money to give it away. You can't make it up. And not only that, people don't get how big the problem is. Right now, Medicare Part B, as in boy, is $99.5 trillion underfunded. Medicare Part D, $22.1 trillion underfunded, and Social Security, $77 trillion underfunded. That's $175 trillion bucks in underfunded promises. And a trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. I mean, it's just too stupid to be stupid. And put it all, and then come full circle, we have $8.9 trillion in treasuries that need to be reset at higher interest rates this year. And if China's selling treasuries, in fact, they're this close to moving from number 2 to number 3 behind the United Kingdom, where Jim Willey thinks that we're funneling money under the table to the UK and to Ireland to buy our treasuries because no one else wants them, to maintain an illusion that we are not engaging in monetization of the bond market, which is the road to Weimar Republic. So we're supposed to believe that UK and Ireland and Cayman Islands are the 3 biggest holders of our treasuries. If indeed China is selling treasuries, and they were at $3 trillion. Now they're at just over $700 billion. So they're totally shedding, and they're buying gold instead. And if the Fed, which is the number 1 holder of treasuries, is China number 2 for now, if they are quantitatively tightening, letting those treasuries roll off the balance sheet. Who the hell is going to buy 10 trillion a year for the next 10 years? It says that we have to do 10 trillion a year. By the way, in February, China dumped 22.7 billion in treasuries. They're dumping treasuries, and that's why rates are rising, and buying gold. That's why there's a floor underneath it, because it can't be sanctioned away from them. And it's massively outperformed the bond market for the last 25 years. It's averaged 9.1% compounding for 25 years since 2000 to where it is now, with no counterparty risk, no sanction, no confiscation, no default risk. It is replacing the Treasury. In a historical context, the Treasury has about that big of a historical footprint, another country's debt as being an asset. So these things are all happening rapidly, but the world looks at us as broke, insolvent, hypocritical, and all flat out stupid. And I think that they are using the leverage of our suppression of the markets. And I want to read something to you in a minute about that against us. And that's where we're at.
But you forgot one word. I would ask you this question. Do they view us as a bully? I mean, I love my country. I was born in 1970. I remember the bicentennial celebration. I get the feeling, and I don't like this, that a lot of the world also views us not only as hypocritical, but as kind of a bully, and that we're at this, I don't know what the word is, precipice, or this point in time where just when we need the world to need our dollars more than ever, right? Like right now we have so much, like you said, so many treasuries, 10 trillion that need to be refinanced. We need the world to need our dollars more than ever. The world is kind of standing up collectively, whether it's China selling treasuries, or obviously the formation of the BRICS, and then the 5 additional countries and 30 additional plus countries that want to join. They're all collectively at the same time saying no more, right? Like, and it's kind of a scary situation.
Well, I think it's intended, and I've been very consistent in saying this. You know, you look at the lead economic advisor to the country, Jared Bernstein, graduated from Columbia University, which is another thing I want to talk with you about. But his thesis is to lose the reserve status. It's a privilege we can no longer afford. I think I've talked with you about this before. Mm-hmm. Dethrone King Dollar is a report he wrote advocating for the immediate removal of the reserve status. So by weaponizing the dollar, saying to the world, if we don't align ideologically, we're going to sanction and maybe even confiscate your assets. And then, look, I got kids. I want them to grow up in a great environment and have, you know, a clean air and water and everything. But to tell Saudi Arabia, the linchpin and OPEC of the dollar hegemony, that we're going green is about as stupid as you can get. So you weaponize and you say we're not going to use oil much anymore. You get the ball rolling in terms of, you know, global de-dollarization, global de-treasurization, at a time when you continue to inflate at a massive rate because you are addicted to spending, borrowing money from the world only to give it to the Ukraine, which makes us more divisive. You know, the Chinese and the BRICS and all, you know, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the largest regional financial and military group in the world, that, you know, the president of Belarus, I've been saying for 3 years, they will be in BRICS. So will the Eurasian Economic Union. Well, president of Belarus says they need to get into the BRICS immediately. He's calling for a summit, cooperation. They go around the Belt Road Initiative and in the BRICS, they're building roads and bridges and maritime channels and railways and building gold mines and silver mines and oil refineries and oil rigs and all of these things in a cooperative fashion. They are cooperating instead of coercing and being a bully. There is no question about it. There is no question about it that I think the world looks at us as being tyrannical and bully and hypocritical. And yet, you know, the Chinese, you don't see them fighting wars all over the world, do you?
No.
And say what you want about them, but their path is through cooperation rather than coercion. And we choose the other path. And I think it's very interesting to look at things that way. And that's probably why they're growing and we're starting to become less and less and less of an asset or a currency or a treasury that the world wants to hold because of that.
Fortuna Silver Mines is a global intermediate gold and silver producer. Since 2005, Fortuna's best-in-class management has delivered impressive growth and profits. Fortuna's solid financial position and operational expertise allows for performance in any precious metals price cycle, and provides a foundation from which to harvest great profits in more favorable metals markets. Investing in Fortuna is an investment in quality, long-term, sustainable production of in-demand precious and base metals. But Andy, we're supposed to be afraid of the Chinese, right? If you watch CNN and Fox News, we've been kind of, and I'm sure we just absorb it by being Americans. Like we've been programmed over the last 10 years that the Chinese they're almost like the Japanese were considered back in the 80s. Like you need to be afraid of the Chinese and they're going to attack Taiwan. And but then if China is such an expansionist country, I heard a Chinese person say this once, they're like, we built a wall around our country. Like we don't really want to expand. And if you, I get very passionate about this. Like if you look at it, like where does China have military bases outside of China? Maybe they do. Look, I'm not a military expert, but I think it's very safe to say that if you look at where we have military bases all around the world, no one comes anywhere close to us. And I've heard the Chinese say before, like you have us surrounded, I think Japan, a few other places with nuclear weapons. I mean, we would never stand for that, but we have this picture painted to us that we're the good guy, we're the nice guy. And you said it earlier, it feels like the Chinese are going around the world building things. And I don't want to be, I love my country. I'll say that one last time, but we're going around the world blowing stuff up, and creating, and we do it under this. It's always this, there's either a tyrant that we need to get rid of or a humanitarian issue. But it seems like when the truth comes out, it comes down to something to do with power and resources, oil, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the world is tired of it. And, a couple of things that I think are worth discussing. Yeah. Just about the BRICS, and then we can go on and talk about gold and silver and whatnot. But, for a long time, because of Sergei Glaziev, the finance minister of Russia, I've said for 3 years, largely because of what he's been saying, that the BRICS would ultimately issue a currency that was pegged to commodities. And we've said that it would be a digital currency, one that can sidestep the SWIFT system and all of that stuff. So we said all that too. So there's a very interesting, let me just pull it up here, a very interesting tidbit that came out of an article in TASS. It's a Russian news agency. And in it, let me just find it here, there is a Russian finance minister who is talking about what he'd been talking about, the new currency. And everything that he is saying in it, Ron, I've been saying for 3 years because of what Glaziev is saying. So, and I've said on your show before, the first thing that he said was the idea of a currency, there'll be two baskets. We knew that. The first would be a basket of local currencies of all the countries involved. We've known that. And the second would be a basket of commodities. This is why I've spoken so much about gold as being the only other tier 1 reserve asset as reclassified by the BIS. This is why I focused on the repatriation efforts of all of the central banks repatriating their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of England. And as a side note, you're getting, I think, Representative Mooney from West Virginia, I think is where he's from, petitioning the IRS or petitioning the Fed and saying, who's brought back their gold, even under the Freedom of Information Act, and they won't give that information out. I find it interesting. So we've known all of this, right? And then he said the second part will be, it'll be in digital form. And we've known that. And we've talked a lot about the Project M Bridge, which is their digital platform that allows them to trade cross-border sidestepping SWIFT. They did the first ever in late 23 gold purchase using digital yuan. We've talked about all that. And all that we know, that's nothing new. But what is interesting is what he says about the new system. And I want to read you something here because they understand what we're doing, right? Before I read it to you, I want to read to you one other thing, and then I'll read to you his comment. This is a comment from the head of the Shanghai Gold Exchange in 2014. Shanghai Gold will change the current gold market with its consumed in the East but priced in the West arrangement. And when China has the right to speak in the international gold market, the true price of gold will be revealed. He said that 10 years ago, almost to the day.
Wow.
And so he's saying, look, when the real price, when we are allowed to really speak, meaning I think that means when the price is quoted in Shanghai, when the price is quoted in Moscow, not on the fraudulent, rehypothecated, over-leveraged COMEX and LBMA. Now, why do I say that? Listen to this. He says, and I've been saying this is going to happen. He says the second part is price. This is the Russian finance minister. And by the way, his name, for people who want the name, is Yuri Ushakov. And Yuri says the second part is price. For the moment, let's underline that. For the moment, price is determined by Western speculation. We produce these commodities and we consume them, but we do not have our own price mechanism, which will balance supply and demand. During the COVID panic, the price of oil fell to nearly zero. Now, he's wrong. We know it went to negative 40 a barrel because there were way more tankers lined up in the Gulf of Mexico than there was the ability to unload them. So, the stupidity of the futures market put it at negative 40 a barrel. Anyways, it's impossible to make any strategic planning for economic development if you do not control prices of basic commodities. Here's the kicker. Price formation with this new currency will get rid of Western exchanges of commodities. They understand that we're suppressing the price of gold and silver, but it goes on and he says, that's why we also developed the new BRICS grain exchange, where global prices are primarily determined by the Chicago Commodity Exchange. Moscow also seeks to move away from trading grain and other soft commodities for the US dollars in favor of the national currencies of the BRICS member states. So they're going after the grains. Like China just canceled a huge grain order with the United States and Australia and replaced it with Russia. Will pay for it in yuan, which is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange, the only other tier one asset. The Chinese bought the London Metals Exchange a few years ago. That's the base metals, copper and zinc and lead and steel. And now they're warehousing metals traded on the LME in China. So they're not only going around the world in a cooperative fashion, building gold and silver mines and oil refineries, natural gas, all of the stuff, rare earths in Africa, and bringing it out, industrializing these countries cooperatively. But they're bought the LME. They're buying and cornering the market on grains, and they want to change the price setting mechanism on that too. And then they tell us, for the moment, prices of precious metals are set in the West. That ain't going to last. And that's what they're doing. They're using the suppression of the paper markets, which we do to maintain an illusion of dollar and bond market supremacy and strength, against us, to drain the shelves. And when they do have their chance to speak, like he's saying, in other words, when the real price is revealed, it'll be a religious experience for those people who think that this drawn out little by little process of de-dollarization and de-treasurization is a nothing burger, and they disregard it and poo-poo it. It'll be a very, very, very big mistake. And I think indeed they are incredibly methodical and regimented in the way that they are doing this. So you will see prices higher than anyone ever thinks possible, but not until we go over the cliff. And I don't know when that is. It's when probably when the West, no one in the West is stupid enough to sell another ounce of gold or another drop of oil or another bushel of wheat at these make-believe prices. And that comes to an end very quickly.
If you're looking to buy gold, silver, or platinum, do yourself a favor and check out Pimbex, the online precious metals bullion dealer and sponsor of Ron's Basement. I was a happy customer before they offered to support the channel. You'll find they have the best prices, quality, and service. I think Pimbex is best, and you will too. And be sure to tell them that you're from Ron's Basement. Yeah, it feels like the world is changing very rapidly. But like you said, at the same time, we don't know for sure when it all falls apart. So over my right shoulder there, I have my Jenga game out because I've heard you talk about it like Jenga, right? Like little piece by piece, and everything's fine. The tower's great. It still looked, sturdy. And then it's just that one last piece that gets pulled out and the whole thing.
Well, that's just it. The Jenga game can take hours and people, oh gosh, but the speed at which it all comes down, that's a good analogy. Yeah. Little by little takes a long time, but people have grown obsessed with instant gratification, and that's not quick enough for most people. And you watch the rise of NVIDIA and the rise of Bitcoin, and people, you know, it's a rush, it's a high, and that's how it's supposed to be, right? My mentor, Richard Russell, God rest his soul, said, if you make 7% a year, you are a rock star. This is a guy that was an analyst in Dow theory, the Dow theory letters, for 50, 60 years. And he says, you make 7% a year, you are a rock star. Well, you know, gold is appreciated by 9.1% per year for the last century, for the last 25 years. And yet no one notices it because it's the tortoise, not the hare. And you take Bitcoin out of the equation, which started from zero. It's outperformed every asset class, period, that you can think of. Every one, bonds, stocks, you name it, handsomely, without the counterparty risk, without the default risk, and all of the stuff associated with the US government. So yes, this is a trend that is being done methodically. And I think they understand this. Now, one other thing, and I'm not going to take the time to go over this, but I want to task everyone with doing something for me, please. You know, I have said, if it were just all of that stuff we've done around the world, we could probably pull ourselves out of it because we were a united country. We were a country that had, you know, the best judicial system in the world, the best electoral system in the world, the best immigration system in the world. We respected our teachers and our police men and women and our parents, and we respected authority. It doesn't mean we couldn't challenge it, but we respected it. And we believed in God, and we did right by one another, but we were united, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, we had differences of opinion, but we were a united country. And you look at all of the shit that's happened in this country, Ron, and all the things that I just said, it's the inverse of that, really. Yeah. You know, I mentioned to you Jared Bernstein, the architect in my mind of the de-dollarization theory, right? The world reserve status is a privilege we can't afford anymore. Well, he, along with President Obama, and who else? Obama, him, Madeleine Albright, the former deputy secretary to the United Nations. Who else? Let me just read a couple more. The current Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who just happens to be in China right now. And then the former attorney generals, Bill Barr and Eric Holder. They all graduated from Columbia. And in particular, I'm focusing on Obama and Jared Bernstein. Jared Bernstein is the chief economic advisor of the U.S. government. And I think it's his idea to tell Saudi Arabia we're going green and to weaponize the dollar to make all of these countries join the BRICS and to leave the dollar. And if you realize that they went to Colombia and there is a theory, and I don't know if you've heard of this theory. Have you ever heard of the Cloward-Piven theory?
No, I have not.
I want everyone out there to Google the Cloward-Piven theory, Clowardpivan. For the benefit of those who don't know, Richard Cloward and Frances Fox Piven, they were husband and wife, two professors who taught at Columbia University. They outlined a plan to socialize America by overwhelming the system with government spending and entitlement programs. And when you read this, I'm not joking, it will blow your mind. It'll blow your mind because it's happening in real time. Letting 12 million people in here illegally. One of the tenets of it is they say, they specifically mentioned targeting America's large cities for the colossal welfare push. A series of welfare drives in large cities, we believe, would impel action on a new federal program to redistribute income. They reveal the best way to achieve their goals is to create a new loyal voting bloc out of the rapidly increasing number of welfare recipients. How about the 12 million people who just came in? You think they'll ever vote to be deported or have their free money taken away from them? They talk about the intentional destructions of America's major systems will compel the federal government to develop a communist universal basic income program. And they say that they both agree that the mainstream media would play a critical role in their organized attack against America. To quote Cloward and Piven, as the crisis develops, it will be important to use the mass media to inform the broader liberal community about the inefficiencies and injustices of welfare. I want you to think about this as it pertains to all of the people that have been led into this country illegally. And they talk about a massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. 12 million illegals here, 63% of non-citizens right now, 63% are actively utilizing some form of taxpayer-funded welfare. Only 35% of American households are. They are overwhelming the cities. They are overwhelming the welfare system. When I mentioned that the Congressional Budget Office sees that by 2031, 100% of tax revenue goes just to pay the interest on the debt and the mandatory entitlement. That doesn't take into account the 12 million people in here illegally. How do you clothe them, house them, food them, school them, educate them? How do you do that?
Yeah.
And that's the point. I want people to read this and think about it. Read it. It will take you 15 minutes max, 10 minutes. Read the Cloward Piven strategy and realize that Obama and Jared Bernstein went there, including Anthony Pilkin, and wonder, are they students of this ideology? Because when you read it, you will be, oh my God, it's exactly what they're doing. And then put it into a broader context of what we're doing outside the country. We are trying to create the reset. They are trying to reset the system by incentivizing the world to say, America's lost their mind both here and there, and we don't need dollars anymore. And why would they do that? Because Richard Russell, as I mentioned, my mentor, said the Fed 15 years ago, he said the Fed has two choices, inflate or die. How about find a villain? And so sons of bitches, Xi Jinping and Putin and OPEC, how could they dump this? How could they do it? How could they dump dollars? And when they did that, you point to them as blowing up the system, because when everyone dumps dollars and they hit our shores, creating hyperinflation, because every country in the world's had to stockpile them for 50 years to buy oil, the banks, the insurance companies, massively over-leveraged and undercapitalized and filled with treasuries. Boom, the dollar. Boom, stock market, boom, the bond market, boom, the real estate market, boom. They're all inversely correlated to that moment. And they did it to us. Yeah. But that's when Lael Brainerd, the number 2, and God help us if Obama wins again. I mean, excuse me, there's a Freudian slip. If Biden wins again, she will be the head of the Fed. She will be the Fed's secretary, number 1 at the Fed. Lael Brainerd, a modern monetary theorist. She was number 2 at the Fed recently underneath Powell. She ran Point for Fed Now, which is Venmo on steroids, backed by the Fed. That will take the place of checks and wires shortly. Yeah. And she developed the CBDC with MIT. She will be the head of the Federal Reserve. She's a modern monetary theorist. And this is what she wants. Have no fear. We know you've lost everything. Just take the CBDC, will make you whole. Now, is that supposition? Yeah, everything up to that point is fact. When you talk about what it could lead to, sure. If we lose the reserve status and the world dumps dollars, you will see a religious experience. And very, very quickly, the thought of a central bank digital currency becomes real. Universal basic income, it becomes real. The Cloward Piven theory, it becomes real. And when you see this stuff, and that's how the hell are we not clinging to the privilege of being the world reserve? Why are we doing everything we can to piss the world off, to sanction, to bully, to coerce, to confiscate, instead of embracing and doing things cooperatively? And that's where, you got to try and put all this together. And that's the outcome that I see. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I do see.
Well, Andy, look, I have a degree in accounting. I worked for one of the big 4 accounting firms. So, I have a basic financial knowledge, maybe advanced financial knowledge. I don't want to scare anybody, right? And what you talked about lays out a pretty scary scenario. But what you talked about with the Cloward Piven theory is what's going on right now. And if you apply a calculator, basic arithmetic, to the situation, there really is no way out. There really is no way out. I mean, and then if you compound that with, like we talked about, kind of geopolitical developments in the world, it exacerbates the situation. It gets downright scary. I mean, do you see, I guess it's 6 or 1/2 dozen the other, gross devaluation in the dollar, which will mean, like, let's call it very, very high inflation in our future. And do you think that people that are holding physical metals will have a life raft during that environment?
Well, there's great strength in the dollar right now, which is very strange. It's counterintuitive. It's because a lot of countries need to accumulate dollars to make good on their dollar-based debts. Yeah. And that's a short-term phenomenon. I think there will be more and more and more countries that will join the BRICS, will join this group with safety in numbers. And there's another 36 countries that have formally applied, 20-some that have informally applied, which we'll find out in October who they admit. But yes, ultimately, I do believe the dollar's days as being the supreme world reserve currency, at least the single. Look, you could argue our hegemony is gone right now. The supremacy is still there. It still is the major currency, and the strength globally is crazy how strong the dollar is. And it's hurting a lot of these smaller industrialized nations that would love nothing more than to never use the dollar again, because they have to sell more of their local currency to buy dollars, to buy commodities, oil or whatever, or to pay their debts. So it's created a temporary strengthening of the dollar. But ultimately, and this is why I think people that go out on a limb and say in 3 months or this date it's going to happen, mathematically, like you say, with arithmetic, mathematically, economically, and then sprinkle some logic on it, it's going to happen. Don't know when. But yeah, I think ultimately the dollar will lose a tremendous amount of its value, and it will come in the light of it no longer being sought after because of our actions in terms of sanctioning and confiscation, because of our massive, stupid, heroin addicted spending binge that the government is on, the irresponsible spending binge of creating $1 trillion in debt every 100 days and $100 billion in interest payments, new interest payments every 100 days. It's reaching that point like a hockey stick of it going parabolic, and it all goes hand in hand. But yes, ultimately the dollar will lose a good deal of its value. Not sure when, but I wouldn't want to be 60 seconds late. And I think it's better to be 6 months, 6 years, or 16 years early than it is 60 seconds late, when this, once in a lifetime Rubicon is crossed over, moving from one system or one reserve currency to perhaps another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and I'm in my mid 50s. So my entire life, I've had the experience that the dollar was worth something, right? And I was taught growing up that the banks are the safest place to keep your money, right? My parents are in their 80s. They firmly believe the banks are, ask people in that generation, even my generation, I think they say the banks, it's that normalcy bias. It's that recency bias, right? Like I've never experienced what maybe someone who's my age or your age, I'm sure you're younger than me, experienced in Venezuela, right? Like they've experienced the situation, they've experienced, and I know that it's different. If you talk about Argentina or you talk about Venezuela, people say, well, yeah, but they're not the world reserve currency and they're not the most powerful. But I would argue the point that, the laws of mathematics don't care how big you are. The laws of mathematics apply to large countries just like small countries. And I'll still go back to that point that the basic mathematics don't work. I mean, it's and as you talked about, and it's hard to put into words. It's like we're in this little period where, yeah, the dollar's still strong. Look, it's, the dollar index is at 106, and if you compare the dollar to the euro or the yen, the dollars, but it's kind of a mirage. Like everything became a big mirage. I like to argue the point about the Fed. That when we were on the gold standard in this country, the Fed was a bank. It seems like to me that the Federal Reserve has now become more of a public relations firm than a bank, right? Like they're more concerned with what they're communicating to the market to influence people to behave in a certain way than they are about just strong fundamental banking and money issues. Well,
they've been wrong on everything that they've tried to influence. There was no inflation, then it was transitory, then structural, then it was gone, now it's back. Bernanke said the subprime crisis is contained, and then it blows up a few days later. They've been wrong on everything. And is that intentional? Maybe, maybe not. Are they inept? Maybe, maybe not. Not sure. But yeah, I mean, look, the Fed and the government seem to be much more connected than they ever were either, or as well, in the respect that, in 2008, the Fed balance sheet was $700-800 billion and ballooned up to $9 trillion. Most of that ballooning was the purchase of U.S. Treasuries, which were now supposedly they're selling, but we're letting roll off their balance sheet. But yeah, the Federal Reserve is certainly neither federal nor a reserve, and they are massively broke. By the way, all of the excess money that the Fed earns, they give to the Treasury. It goes into the Treasury General Account Fund, and they are way underwater, which means the Treasury is not getting that money for the first time ever. They've been getting it since its existence over 100 years, and now they're way underwater because of all of the increase in yields and all of the low yielding treasuries and mortgage-backed securities that they're hanging on to. They are way underwater. So they're not giving that money to the Treasury. So not only is the Treasury not getting that, the Fed isn't buying their Treasury, supposedly. They're letting them roll off their balance sheet. And all of the countries like China are dumping them in favor of gold. So who finances our stupid, addictive fiscal behavior? I don't know who's going to buy those treasuries. I don't know.
They're going to have to monetize it.
That's what leads to Weimar Republic. So all of these things, there's a, they're happening, and there's a quickening going on. Things are happening much faster than before. And what is the climax? Is it in October or November? Who knows? Does it continue to go on? Who knows? But I think that there will be consequences for these actions, no question about it. And this is why you buy gold and silver, Ron. It's not to get wealthy, it is wealth. And when you see the central banks buying more gold and silver than in any time in history, they are far more than the most well-funded. They're the most well-informed traders in the world. They know where things are going. They know the script. They're clued in on the agenda. And if you watch what they're doing and care less about the price, because as I read to you, the BRICS and the chairman of the Shanghai Gold Exchange, they understand what we are doing by suppressing price. They're using it against us. This is why they're not bitching about it. If they're stupid enough, they're thinking, to suppress the price, this is why you can only suppress a market or manipulate a market for an extended period of time by pushing it in the direction that it is going. Now, I would add, not only is it going higher, but back in the day, when they started suppression years and years and years and years ago, maybe 40 years ago, India and Russia and China, they couldn't stand up to the West. They weren't sophisticated enough, wealthy enough, clever enough as it pertains to catch on to what we were doing. And I think they all are now. They know exactly what we're doing and have for a while and been using that against us. This is why they're not bitching. This is why they're okay with when they slam it down. And this is why it bounces right back up, because they continue to accumulate everything from wheat and corn and soybeans to base metals, to precious metals, to rare earth metals. And they're striking relationships all around the world in a cooperative manner. They're doing it the right way. And we are kind of the last vestiges, if you will, of a terminal empire that seems to be moving in the wrong direction in every way. Indebtedness, morally, socially, economically, politically, you name it. We seem to just be, throwing in the towel almost in so many of these areas. And you wonder, is it intentional? Are we trying to reset the system and point to a villain? Those guys, instead of the brain dead monetary policy and the irresponsible fiscal policy of the government, I don't know. I'll let that be for everyone else to decide, but it sure feels that way to me, to be honest with you.
First Mining Gold is a development company advancing two of the largest gold projects in Canada. Springpole in Ontario and Duparquet, located in Quebec, each already has 5 million ounces of gold reserves, but exploration initiatives are underway at both projects to find even more gold. First Mining is well-financed, has zero debt, and owns an interest in 4 additional Canadian gold development projects.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. And I read articles that say, and you obviously have a much better feel for this than I do, having been the CEO of Miles Franklin now for many years. But it feels like, and what I'm reading is that like a lot of even average Americans aren't buying precious metals, right? I mean, there's the stacking community, there's the people that turn off the mainstream media news and maybe just dig in a little bit deeper to understand what's going on, that are buying precious metals. But my neighbors aren't buying a lot of gold and silver. I know that. And what I actually do read is that even like at pawn shops, and that people are selling, these storefronts that have, we buy gold, that people are selling them some of the metals that they do have. And that a lot of that is being melted down and directly or indirectly leaving the United States and heading east.
Yeah, that's true. If you look at the ETF numbers, GLD and SLV, they're falling off at a 45-degree angle. Now, when I mentioned that to my buddy Bill Holter, I agreed to a degree with what he's saying. He said, yeah, that's a lot of it is the share redemptions, where the big money can come in, like the baskets, the authorized participants, the commercial banks, they can redeem their shares in a very private manner without much visibility, like taking delivery off of Comex, and they can drain the exchanges. But that's part of it. I mean, it's also the American public has been selling into the rally and buying NVIDIA and Bitcoin, which have been extraordinary, right? And I get that. You look at the across the pond at the Asian ETFs, they're going straight up, and they continually get stopped because of there's so much volume. They have to, the circuit breaker is triggered, and they got to stop it and let it catch up. The demand in Asia is off the charts. The demand in this country is non-existent. I've been saying for months that's a massive contrarian indicator. And if it's been rising in the face of positive real return, now if you believe the bullshit numbers out of the BLS, and that's why I say bullshit, take the L out, and that's what it is. Yeah. The numbers are a lie. They're telling us inflation is 3%. John Williams will say inflation, no, is 11%. And he just uses the same numbers the way they used to use them before they changed them. But even if let's just take them at face value. Okay. So you're making a positive real return on a 6-month treasury of over 2% without any risk, supposedly, right? So in the face of a positive real yield, in the face of a strong dollar, the price keeps going up. In the face of lack of Western participation, in fact, very, very little Western participation, it still goes up. It's the central banks that are doing this. It's the Chinese public that is doing this. The people that get it, that is doing it, using the suppression against us. And it's a shame that the public, either surprised that it got this high, have been holding on for a very long time and just capitulated, or forced to sell, that are doing that at a time when the biggest and most sophisticated and well-informed money in the world is buying at a level the world's never seen. So you are right. And it is a contrarian indicator. We've seen a lot of very large sales, and mostly by folks 70 years or older and spending tens of millions of dollars because they're like, this world is going to shit. This country is not the country I grew up in. And they're more keenly aware of it. They're not as concerned about making tons of money as much as they are keeping it, preserving it, and passing it on. And I'm dead serious on this. It's shocking the amount of older people that have placed very, very large orders with us over the last several months, all of them lamenting the same thing. When Silicon and Signature failed, we added 14,000 clients in 45 days. That is what I ultimately expect to see when there is some event, when the American public wakes up. But it's the antithesis of that right now, and the price keeps going higher without the Western participation. Yeah, it's a big, big contrarian indicator, and it just goes to show that this is being driven by much larger factors, much larger forces, and I would say it's being driven by the most sophisticated, well-informed money on the planet, and that's really what's going on, the central banks.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about large orders from older people because what we both know is that with age comes wisdom. So what are they seeing that that maybe the 20-something or 30-something crowd isn't seeing? That if you're in your 70s or 80s and you've lived long enough to gain that wisdom, that suddenly moving to gold and silver seems like a good idea. Andy, thank you.
You got it, brother.
I have a new perspective on world events. I want to make sure I have this right. You mentioned it earlier, that the theory, is it
Cloward Piven, Cloward, CLOWARD PIVEN. And then for kicks, put dash Jared Bernstein, and you'll see that he's an advocate of this, and it'll blow your mind. The Cloward Piven theory, taught at Columbia University in the 60s by a husband and wife professor. And you just got to wonder, is this the path that they've chosen for us? When you read it, you'll be like, my God, this is exactly what's happening. Is it coincidence? I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. I'll leave it up to you to decide.
Yeah, no, the part that you read that I heard today during our conversation definitely sounds like the set of circumstances in which we find ourselves right now. If people want to learn more about you or Miles Franklin, what's the best way?
Well, you don't go to milesfranklin.com. Of course, we only allow limited purchasing on there. Send us an email at info@milesfranklin if you'd like to see a really, really, really competitive price list, maybe more so or as much as anyone in the industry, or any questions you heard on this interview you want to ask about it, or anything else. Info@milesfranklin. And just for our own internal sake, if you just let us know that you saw me on Ron's Basement, that'd be great. Just like to know where you're coming from, and no obligation in requesting a price list. Just want to make sure that people know they can ask questions or ask to be contacted as well. If not, we won't. And we'll just send you what you're looking for. So info@milesfranklin.com. And Ron, I appreciate it, brother. You're one of the good guys. I follow what you do. I love coming into the basement, and look forward to coming back downstairs with you again sometime real soon.
It's our quarterly update, unless you want to do it sooner, right? You're always welcome here. There's a lot of great people. You and I were talking about Jake from Jake's Custom Parts.
I love
right?
Jake.
Yeah,
He's one of the greatest guys ever.
Yeah, he was in the basement. He came by a month and a half ago. We did a live stream from down here, and I think it goes along with what you talked about today. He likes to refer to you as the time traveler because you have a uncanny ability to see into the future, right? Of course, you're going to be humble and say, no, you're not.
I got lucky, man. I mean, there are a lot of things I thought would happen that never did or took a lot longer than I thought.
Right.
I saw stuff few years ago. People thought I was nuts, the bricks and the Belt Road and all of these things. And lo and behold, they've happened. And the quickening by which they are happening, the speed at which they're accelerating actually has me concerned more than anything. So thank you, Jake. You know, I love you. And I've had dinner with Jake and his family, and he's a good dude. And anyways, for what it's worth, Ron, I do love being on here. And I think with the big bricks meeting in October and the election in November, God willing, let's try and connect again sometime this fall and take a look at the tea leaves and see where we're at.
That sounds great to me, Andy. Thank you. And on behalf of our viewer, thank you for all the information, insights that you shared with us. And we will see you again soon in the basement.
Look forward to it. In the meantime, you all be well. All the best to you and your family, Ron, and to everyone else out there. Stay well, as the Chinese curse reads. May you live in interesting times. And boy, oh boy, these are getting interesting. So thanks for having me, dude. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.